What in the world is the most powerful steam locomotive ever? That's an interesting question. I've actually done a list of the most powerful locomotives in general before, but as it turned out, those were all electric units. That wasn't on purpose, it just so happened that all the most powerful locomotives on the planet were, or are, electric locomotives. But what about steam? Steam locomotives are arguably the most popular kind of locomotive among rail fans, and people would want to know, what are the most powerful among them? Well, let's talk about that. Hello, welcome to another episode of History in the Dark. I am your host, Darkness the Curse, and before we begin, as always, thank you so much to my generous patrons, my British rail critics, and of course my underwater train fighters. You are the reason why this content remains
unspeakably powerful.
And today, we are going to discuss the most powerful steam locomotives ever. 5 of them. The top 5. Yes, you probably gathered that already. Because you read the title, which is why you clicked. Hi, please like and subscribe! That's what all the YouTubers say. I don't say that very often. It'd be nice, though. The Union Pacific Big Boy, nope, gotcha! Big Boy is actually not on this list at all. The Big Boy is not in the top 5 for most powerful in terms of tractive effort, which is what I'm going off of. I thought about horsepower, but horsepower is a little more vague than I'd like, but tractive effort is really where it's at because, well, that's the pulling power, which is what trains are for. So I tend to usually look at that when it comes to judging an absolute power output. The Big Boy has been shoved out of the top 5 by the Dulles Mesabi and Iron Range Yellowstones. And in DM&IR's case, theirs were built by Baldwin in 1941 and 1943. A total of 18 were put into production. These locomotives were built for freight service, and were known as very reliable yet very powerful pieces of work. Their power output in terms of horsepower was 6,250. That's 5,660 kilowatts. But they can only go a maximum speed of about 45 miles per hour, 72 kilometers per hour, which makes them slower than the Big Boy, but they were never meant to go very fast. They were meant to pull really heavy ore trains. So, what's their tractive effort? Oh, 140,093 pounds of force. That's 623.16 kilonewtons. These things were really, really strong, and were very impressive. Unfortunately, 3 of these amazing locomotives did wind up in preservation, so they can still be seen in the modern day. And it is also worth mentioning that DM&IR were not the only ones to utilize Yellowstones. However, theirs, oddly, were way more powerful than everyone else's. So, that's just something to consider. The Norfolk Western 2882s, Class Y. Ooh, yeah, more big chungus locomotives over here. The Class Ys included a very large roster of actually compound Malays that were first put into service in 1912. The initial variants were actually not very good, but they improved them during World War I. Eventually the Ys and their subclasses became a very successful line of locomotives for them. They worked right up until the end of steam on the railway. The specific version we want to talk about is, of course, the Y6a. Again, not very fast, with a maximum speed of 50 miles per hour, 80 kilometers per hour, but with excellent power output at 5,600 horsepower, 4,200 kilowatts. But what about that tractive effort? Well, interestingly, the tractive effort actually fluctuates, as built in their compound form. As Malays, they're capable of 126,838 pounds of force. That doesn't sound like a lot, which is lower than the Yellowstones. Why are they here? Now, that's because later alterations allowed to operate as simple articulates, not Malays. When these changes were made, the tractive effort went up to 166,000 pounds of force, 738.4 kilonewtons. There is one example of a Y6A still around. Number 2156, on display at the St. Louis Museum of Transportation. She actually stands as the strongest pulling steam locomotive in the world as of right now, though she hasn't operated in years. But it is nice that she still stands proud. as an exceedingly powerful locomotive. But she's only number 4, so that means there's more powerful locomotives than her? Yup. The Virginian Railway's 28884 Triplex XA locomotive. Somehow I always wind up here. It doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter how well I try to dodge it. We always talk about triplexes at some point. It's like a monthly occurrence with these things. And it's not a surprise because there's just such an oddity. Triplexes are notable because they have 3 sets of driving wheels. The Virginian Railway were not the only ones to attempt this nonsense, but the XA was one of the most powerful examples. Built in 1916 by Baldwin, only one of these was made to run experiments. Now they could never ever go very fast, and by that I mean they couldn't actually go greater than 5 miles per hour. The 6 cylinders just ate all the steam, more than the boiler could actually produce, which is a serious mathematical problem. The boiler was literally incapable of producing enough steam to actually feed the locomotive, so it was impossible for her to run very fast or for very long. The only thing she was ever good for was for helping heavier trains over hills, which is generally what these triplexes wound up doing. And the reason is, even though they couldn't run for very long or very fast, they did have
Incredible power.
In the XA's case, it could produce 166,600 pounds of force, 741 kilonewtons. That's not bad at all. Also, it was a Mallet, fun fact. Though admittedly, with this design, they would almost have to recycle the steam. And I like how even though they did recycle the steam, they still couldn't produce enough steam. Like, oh, okay, wow. So what happened to this thing? Well, eventually the Virginian had enough fiddling with it and sent it back to Baldwin so she could be rebuilt into 2 separate locomotives, a 2880 and a 282. Those locomotives lasted until 1953, actually. They were pretty good, but neither of them were preserved, so there was nothing remaining of the Virginian's XA Triplex. The Erie Class P-1 28882 Triplex locomotive. Oh, what again? Come on! I just got done talking about the Virginians! Erie, you too? And yours is more powerful! Interesting. Well, I'm gonna be real with you. Pretty much everything said about the Virginian is the same thing here. It all applies. Once again, this triplex could not actually produce enough steam to meet the demand of the cylinders. It was impossible. Though Erie got a little crazy and actually wanted 3 of the blasted things. They were very powerful and could reportedly pull 650 freight cars, which was very impressive, and they were primarily used again as pushers on grades that required helper locomotives, because they were not very good. They were very slow. In their case, they couldn't go over 10 miles per hour, and Erie wound up scrapping all 3 of theirs by 1933. But how powerful were Erie's? They were more powerful than the Virginians, and yes, the P1s were better than the XA in terms of tractive effort. These could deliver 176,256 pounds of force, or 784 kilonewtons, which is a pretty impressive display. But again, if you can't go over 10 miles per hour and you keep running out of steam, I mean, why? It just wasn't worth it. There's a reason why triplexes didn't really take off. Especially when they weren't even the most powerful locomotives that could be made. Oh no! The number 1 spot for the most powerful steam locomotive ever is not a triplex. The Virginian Railway Class AE. Ah, the Virginian coming back, taking the crown, needing that power for those long coal drags and those heavy steep grades. We get it, but what the heck is this? A 2-10-10-2? First of all, 2-10-10-2, oh okay, but that's still not a triplex. In fact, this was a Mallet. Thus, they recycled their steam from the rear high-pressure cylinders into the lower-pressure front cylinders. Their boiler pressure was 215 psi, and their 48-inch low-pressure cylinders were actually the largest on any U.S. locomotive. They actually had to be inclined a few degrees to provide clearance. That's how big they were. And their boiler was the largest diameter of any locomotive ever. The outside diameter of the largest course was 112 7/8 inches. That's 2,867 millimeters. But how powerful were they? Well, in Mallet form, they could only do about 147,200 pounds of force. That's 655 kilonewtons, and that's not bad at all. But that wouldn't put them in the number one spot, but haha! They have a little clever play in their hands. Where you see, they could indeed operate in simple form, not in Mallet form. Now that was only ever used for starting, basically to get really heavy trains actually moving, but they could do it. And therefore, by my rules, that counts. In simple form, these things could deliver 176,600 pounds of force, 786 kilonewtons, making them, as far as my research shows so far, the most powerful steam locomotive, in terms of tractive effort, that has ever existed. Sadly, even though 10 of these were built, not a single one wound up in preservation. Every single one of them was destroyed and sold for scrap by 1949. It's a shame that we couldn't see something like this around in a museum or something, but it's nice to know that they definitely once existed. And with that, a special thank you to all my underwater train finders, Sumdude267, Orange Glass, Benjamin Owens, Spencer Kitsune 131-232, Josh Johnson, Metal for Life Guy, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Tommy Rossini, Lord Captain Von Thrust III, Joshua Long, Brian, Jack Carson Zero Videos, Hayden DeGrow, Master of None, Lord Hoth 444, Alaric Jaspers, The Baxter, That Guy with a Beard, Mark Holding, Lock Kraken, Murder and Drones Doll, A-Person 723, DM Tribal Typhoon, Ohio Trucker 1, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Alfonso Lapuche, Royal Hudson 2860, Iserfer 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, and Dr. Racer 78. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.